I know what you guys are thinking. I know what you're thinking when you start seeing a PowerPoint presentation or some other person in email marketing talking about testing. But don't roll your eyes just yet. Because have you ever heard the phrase, well, just test it, or how about we test it? And oftentimes people love to expand about the value of email testing and why you should test and the reasons why and all the different outcomes. So, but bear with me for a second because I'm just not your ordinary email guy. In fact, when I think about being an ordinary email guy, I think about experience matters. And experience does matter in this case because I've sat in your seat as email marketer, sending billions of emails. I've sat in a strategist seat by giving strategy to companies and writing plans for email testing. So I want you to just sit back for a second because this presentation is not necessarily about the value of testing. It's more about how do you start? How do you start to test and do the things that people have been really saying for many, many years? And really it boils down to starting with about a great quote from David Ogilvy about never stop testing. But I also have a philosophy when it comes to email and testing. And that philosophy is, first of all, if you just test an email, if you just test an email, it's a complete waste of your time. It is. Because you could say I've done testing an email and then respond to a survey saying, of course I test an email. But really, you're not really learning anything. You're not really moving forward by just testing an email. And believe it or not, there is a difference because testing in email is not a waste of your time. So how do you start to test an email? And how do you continue to start to learning through testing? Well, I think about it in 10 different ways. So how do you start to stay testing? Let's talk about the first thing is having a nimbleness mentality. Your organization needs to be nimble and you need to adopt this mentality pretty well. And there's really 4 components to this nimbleness mentality. There's prioritization. First thing about prioritization is to understand what do we have to have versus what's the nice to have. Yeah, sure, it's nice to say you do a complex task, but is that really a need? We don't really want to be able to say it's a need to test a multivariate call to action, 17 different types of buttons, but maybe a need to have is, are people going to engage based off of our messaging strategy or a subject line? The second component in terms of a nimbleness mentality, is fluidity. You have to change. You have to know that just because you put something together, you have to look to change it based off of the results that you have. Nothing is more frustrating, right, than to execute a test and then not change anything as you continue to learn stuff. The third thing around a nimbleness mentality is empowerment. Empowerment by a few people, not by a lot. Don't decision by committee when it comes to email testing. Make sure you have about 4 people to really sit down and say, this is the test that we performed. We were fluid in how we changed the way that we did things. And these are the changes that we are going to make. Lastly, in this nimbleness mentality, creating a library. Nothing is more frustrating than when you say, well, have you tried this test? Yeah, we did that years ago and it didn't work. Well, what didn't work? What did you try, right? What was the key KPI? What was the segmentation like? What was the statistical significance? You have to vault everything. Think of it as like keeping a library of stuff. The second thing is have a testing calendar, right? There's nothing easier than doing a testing calendar and sticking to it. Well, maybe it's not that easy, right? Because a lot of people say, well, what do I do? How do I create a testing calendar? The good news is I have a copy of a testing calendar that has been refined over years and years and years of writing testing plans for many organizations. And then in that testing calendar, you have to have this thing called a hypothesis, right? You have to know what you want to prove, right? Whether it's click rates, or you want to say, we believe in adding personalization, or we believe in doing this, or changing our tone in the messaging, or in fact, a different call to action button message, right? Rather than read more, rather it's learn more, right? So you have to have a hypothesis. Next thing you have to do is to identify what sort of classification testing is. Is it just a statistical, easy 50-50, 10-10, 80 A-B split? Is it a more advanced, like a multivariate, where you're testing multiple different variables in the email? Is it a design of experiment where you're testing thousands of different types of elements? That's a really advanced testing methodology. Most people stick in the A/B to multivariate testing realm. So you have to identify the classification of test, and then you need to say, well, gosh, is this pre-open, pre-send, pre-click, or post-click? Pre-send is before you send your first email. That could be an experience of signing up for an email. Pre-open is stuff like a subject line. Pre-click is the messaging or the location of the call to action button or the size of a call to action button. And then believe it or not, email does not end after they click the button. It has to be something post-click. So you're testing a landing page. Are you testing the amount of information that you're collecting on the landing page? Are you just driving them to the front site, which has the highest number of conversions? Post-click testing is a part of email marketing. The fifth thing to start and to stay testing is your level of effort, right? The one thing you don't want to do is create a test that the level of effort is so incredibly high that it gets everybody frustrated when you try to go and actually perform and execute against the test. In that same vein, that level of effort also has to dictate what your impact is, right? If you do a high level of effort with a low level of potential impact to your program, it's a waste of time. Why would you want to get a potentially low level impact, but have to spend days, weeks, months prepping for the task? You want to make sure that you are realistic in that impact, right? Is it going to impact us medium, or is it a high level impact if we perform this task? Next, you need to determine your KPIs. And this can all be done in the calendar that I'm going to show you in a minute. Are you looking at unique click-through rate, or are you looking at reach, or conversion per email open, or conversion per email click? What exactly is the key KPI that's going to make that test that you perform successful or not successful? Then you need to execute it, right? Leading up to it, it's hard to kind of get to the stage of executing, but what you need to have this and drill this into yourself is part of this mentality, is to lead up to know what you're trying to test and what the success factors are before you actually execute it. Then keep your library. I remember I mentioned that before as part of that nimbleness mentality. Keep a record of your tests. Always avoid that. We've already tried that and it didn't work, or it did work. And then you really have no real way of knowing. Lastly, in terms of starting and continuing to test, you need to share it out with groups of people, whether it's through a monthly or quarterly meeting or review or marketing department meeting. You need to socialize it. And then guess what? It needs to start all over again. Right? It needs to start all over again. I was a part of an organization that had a monthly review of all the tests that were performed across all of the digital channels inside the marketing department. And it was a wonderful way for the email marketing group to say, look what we did, look what we were successful with, and look what we failed at, because failing is a part of testing. So here's an example of a test calendar that I have. It obviously will give you some interesting points of view as the classification and the test type, and writing out your hypothesis or your splits detail. It also gives more details and when it was proposed and what your level of effort is, and then what your potential level of impact. And then you get notes and the different messages to track. And this is a good way to, as you formulate your testing calendar, you can use this as a sort of a basis. I'm happy to send you an iPost, our iPost standardized testing calendar. Just feel free to reach out in the comments or reach out to me in any one of the social channels I play in. Or you can send us an email, right? Forgot to mention that you can send us an email to sales@iPost to get a copy of this calendar. We'll be happy to provide it for you. Last but not least, in all the videos, I'm saying that, you know what, when we start thinking about email marketing, it really is easy to do, but it's hard to do it right. And I hope that you learned that through these videos is that testing is not just about words on a piece of paper or in a spreadsheet. That testing takes patience. It takes a lot of different things to do. But once you do it, once you get into it, once you start getting addicted to do it, you're going to learn a lot. If you want to learn more and you enjoyed this video, obviously hit the like button. And more importantly, go ahead and visit us at iPost.com. Thanks again for your attention. I completely appreciate it, and we'll hope to see you again in the future.